Okay guys, here we are again. We are doing a review of Chapter 5, Key Issue 2 and 3. We're talking about the distribution of language families, so the Indo-European language families, and then a couple of other ones, including the Sino-Tibetan, the Afro-Asiatic, the Niger-Congo, and some of the other African language families. So please find your handouts. These would be the guided notes that we did where we have the language trees and the charts. Okay, so just to review a couple things, we can't really understand the evolution of language unless we understand the earliest culture hearts. So we talked about the earliest culture hearts. This would be the origin of culture, and it's important we understand these 7 hearts because they will continue to now present themselves whenever we talk about in the next unit, the political unit. These will be some of the earliest political systems. And then in the following unit, whenever we talk about agriculture, these will be the earliest agriculture hearts. And then these will be some of the earliest clustered urban settlements. So our earliest, let's start over here in the Americas. When we talk about Mesoamerica, this is in Mexico and Central America. And this culture groups, the culture hearts would have been with the Aztecs and the Mayans. And then as we go down through South America, we had the Incas who were isolated in the Andes Mountains in Chile and Peru on the western coast of South America. Then in Southwest Asia, we have Mesopotamia, which you've heard about, I'm sure, learned about throughout world history multiple times. This is in present-day Iraq, and this would have been with the ancient city-states of Sumer and Ur and Babylon. Then we have a culture hearth in northern Western Africa, and then one in the Indus River Valley in India. And so many of these will also be presented. And finally, just let me finish up here. Finally, the last one will be in northern China. And in the next chapter, chapter 6, when we're talking about religion and we talk about the origin of the major religions, you will see that these religions, the origins, were in these earliest culture hearths. Southwest Asia, present day Mesopotamia, in this area, this would have been the area where you saw origin of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, and then both Hinduism and Buddhism here in the around the culture hearth, Indus River Valley in India. Okay, let's talk about how we subdivide languages. So, when we're talking about categorizing from the largest to the most specific subgroups. So languages, they begin, if we're talking about the categorization, in the most general is prehistoric superfamily. Then you have that they go up through the they go up through the trunk of the tree, and this is language family. Then off of the trunk come the branches, and then off of the branches sometimes comes the groups. Not every time are the branches divided into groups. Just sometimes they are, and then you have the languages which are off on the leaves. So again, you have the prehistoric superfamily, which is down in the roots. Then as you come through the roots, you see this division into through the trunk, which is the language family. The trunk, the language family, is then further divided into branches, and then off the branches sometimes they are then further subdivided into groups, and then you have the leaves, which are the actual languages. Now, those all the languages that are in the same prehistoric superfamily, so from Hindi to Spanish to English to Tamil to Turkish, they should share some similarities because they can trace back to the original prehistoric superfamily. They will be very few similarities, but you should see some similarities because in the history of the language, and for this one, it's thousands of years. Remember the Kurgan-Renfrew theories that one theory said that the language was about 4,000 to 6,000 years old. One said that it was the prehistoric superfamily was even older. So this is how far back they can trace back to the origin. Then all languages that are in the same family, so in the trunk, all languages that are in the same family, they should share some similarities. So Hindi and Spanish and English, they should share some similarities. They will share more similarities than what they will share with Tamil or Turkish because those are, while they're in the same superfamily, they're not in the same family. Then those languages that are in the same branch, they should share some of the same similarities. So whenever you look at Spanish and French, they'll share similarities. Hindi and Bengali and Farsi, they will all share similarities because they're all in the same, collectively, individually, they're in the same branches. So whenever you look at English and German versus Spanish, English will be much more similar to German than what it will be to Spanish because English and German are in the same branch. And like Hindi and Farsi, they will be much more similar than what they will be with Russian because Hindi and Farsi are in the same branch. And then as you further get, if they are subdivided into groups, those languages that are in the same group, they will be more similar than those languages that are in a different group. So for example, Hindi is much more similar to Bengali and Sinhalese than what it is to Farsi because Hindi, Bengali, and Sinhalese are in the same group. Same thing, English, we are much more similar to German and Afrikaans and Dutch than we are to Norwegian, Danish, Swedish, because we are in the same group with German, Dutch, and Afrikaans. Now, languages that have no common part of the tree, they should theoretically share zero similarities. In today's world with globalization, you do see where there may be some words incorporated, but theoretically, if they're not in any common part of the tree, they should share zero similarities. So let's talk about this process of language evolution. How does it actually occur? So as you start with the prehistoric superfamily down in the roots, and then you travel up through the trunk, and then the branch, and then off into the groups, and then the languages. You see this similarity because language progresses with these steps, and these steps you need to know. First, there is migration. And so once there's migration, they take that language that they speak, or all of them speak with them. And then once they're in their new location, they are isolated. Once they're isolated, they will come into contact with new experiences. Maybe they've never seen a waterfall before, or maybe they've never witnessed a hurricane before, or maybe they've never jumped before. Every time there's a new experience, they must create a new word. Every time they come into contact with a new physical feature, every time there's a new natural phenomenon, they have to create new words. In addition, they may come into contact with new groups of people who don't speak the same language. So then they will blend with other languages from other groups. And then you figure this happens over and over and over again for a period of time. You have migration. You take their language with you. Then you have isolation. Then you come into contact with new experiences, new phenomena, new physical features, and you have to create new words. Then they may blend with other groups with whom they've interacted and who do not speak the same language. You know that the language has split after a migration if you see some similarities of a language like English and German, and then they have some similarities, and then they have different words for the same thing. Once there are different words for the same thing, you know that that's after migration. So, for example, we speak the same language as the people in England speak. However, we both call our terms for umbrella, which we call umbrella, and theirs for brolly are two totally different. You know that those words were created after migration. So let's take a look at where we see the language families of the world distributed. So you see that this is the light color is the Indo-European language family. So you see that the Indo-European, we see them in Europe. And then you see this influence because of colonization. So this is why you see so much Indo-European language family in North America and South America. You see Indo-European heavily influenced because of migration down into this part of, this is Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and then India, and then you see it here as it's gone into Russia again. And then obviously over here in Australia. This is the influence of colonization and migration. Then you have the Arabic language here. This is part of the Afro-Asiatic, as is Hebrew. Hebrew is also part of the Afro-Asiatic. You see this spoken primarily in Southwest Asia and Northern Africa. That's because of diffusion and conquering. The Arabs, they came and they conquered part of Northern Africa. So this is why not only do you see Arabic in the Afro-Asiatic languages here in Southwest Asia and Northern Africa, this is also why you see Islam, because of this diffusion and the conquering of the Arabs. Then you see the Niger-Congo language families. This is here in southern and parts of Western Africa. The most commonly spoken language there is Swahili. That's why Swahili is the lingua franca of much of southern Africa, because there's so many languages spoken here that Swahili, if it's not English, it's Swahili is the common language spoken here. And then over here you see the Sino-Tibetan language family, and this is China. And then you see some parts of Southeast Asia here are part of the Sino-Tibetan. The language family that is the most spoken in the world today is the Indo-European. The language that has the largest number of first language speakers is Mandarin, and that's because China is so large in population. And so here we see our major language families. Here we have Indo-European is the most widely spoken, and then Sino-Tibetan is the second most. However, in the world today, Mandarin is the language with the most first language speakers. So as I was talking about earlier, here we have our language trees. And the roots, we have our prehistoric superfamily. And this is the origin of these languages. And many of these superfamilies, they can trace back to thousands of years. And this splitting, this is where you see migration and isolation. This is where it is, this is where it's exemplified, is here. You see that this split, this is migration and then further isolation. And then as you travel up the trunk, which is the language family. So here's the Indo-European language family and language tree. Here's the Afro-Asiatic, Dravidian, Uralic, Altaic. As you travel up, you see many extinct languages. And then again, you see further migration, isolation, extinct languages, new words, new experiences, new phenomenon. And then you get to the branches. This is, again, where migration is further explained and exemplified. So this is where the groups were together at some point in history in an origin, in a settlement. And then they migrated away and they took their language that they all had in common with them. And then they were isolated. They're isolated here, 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 and here. From the branches, and then they have new words created, new words spoken, blending of other languages. And then sometimes you'll see a further migration, isolation with the branches, with the groups. If there are groups involved, that's an additional migration, isolation pattern. And so those languages, you see the leaves here. If they're together in the same group, that means they were more recently together in the same settlement or the same language of origin. And then as you go further back, then the branch represents that's then the next progression in the historical timeline in terms of when they were together in the same origin. And then the family here in the trunk, then that represents the next stage in the historical progression of these people and when they were together in the same origin. And then finally the superfamily. This is the earliest together in that origin. You can see that languages that have no commonality, so they're not in any of the same roots, they're not in the trunk, they're not in the branch, they're not in the group, they should share zero similarity. So you should see zero similarities between Hindi and English and Turkish and what they have with Mandarin, or what they would have with Thai, or what they would have with Swahili over here, or what they would have over here with Vietnamese or Japanese. There should be zero similarities because they don't touch anywhere on the tree. And so this concludes, you do need to study these trees. You need to know the progression, especially you need to know well the Indo-European. You need to know the historic superfamily, the family, the branches, the groups, and then the major languages. You need to know Sino-Tibetan, Niger-Congo, and the Afroasiatic. Please study these trees and the Renfrew Kurgan.